Hello, in this presentation we will discuss the outline of the QuickBooks Online versus QuickBooks Desktop versions of the QuickBooks software course. We are currently in the overview section. If we scroll down through the overview section, we see that we currently have 48.5 hours of instructional video. That does include the introductions to the presentations, and this number could change over time. Scrolling back up, we're now going to go to the course content. The course content page will have most of the material. It will be laid out by section. If we click on the sections, it will then open the sections and show the detail for each of the sections. As we scroll through the sections, we'll see that some will have a lot more data than other sections. In other words, they won't have an even amount of material, but the sections will give an idea of what it is we will be covering in each of the sections. As we scroll through here, we can see that we are doing a comparison between QuickBooks Online and the QuickBooks Desktop versions. So most of the presentations will have both a desktop version and then an online version of the presentations, comparing and contrasting each step with both the desktop and the online version, so we can see them side by side. Note that this is going to be a compilation of two other courses, that being the online version of QuickBooks and the desktop version. So if you want to see just the online or the desktop version, you can take a look at those. If, on the other hand, we are something like a bookkeeper who would want to get an idea of both versions, or if we are deciding whether or not we should use some type of online version versus a desktop version, then a course like this will give a good idea. It'll give the step-by-step, it'll give the side-by-side, and you can see the format of each of these accounting software side-by-side and make decisions such as that. We also will see that we have the downloadable PDF files, and most of those will be related to the desktop version. And that's because the desktop version is one that we can download, and we could then work offline if we so choose, as opposed to the online version, where of course we need to be somewhere where we have the internet access generally in order to work with the online software. So the PDF files allow us to be able to look at the on-ground version and work some of that problem on ground without the online for the video presentations. We'll also note that we have a backup file for the on-ground versions as well. And that's because the on-ground version allows us to jump forward and jump back with the standard backup files. Now, of course, the reason we have standard backup files, or the reason for backup files, is to usually save the data, so if something is lost, then we can restore the data. The online version has a pretty good system for that because, of course, our data is being saved on the Intuit server, and their server is going to be pretty secure, so we have the backups and we should be able to retrieve them. However, it's difficult for us, though, to have a static backup that we can jump forward and jump back to. The desktop version backups are great for a course like this because they give us that static point. So if we want to rework something, or if we want to jump forward to a future point in time, we can use the backups to go to that point in time and have the data be exactly like the instructional videos that we will be using throughout the course. The ability to go forward to a point in time and have the data set where you want it to be, and or rework information at a previous point in time that we have already done, is a huge benefit to have in a course like this. The online version, as we go through the online version, we're going to have to go through it as we go. We have less ability to jump forward and back with the same data set, but the desktop version, we have the ability to do so with those backups. The course sections will give us an idea of what will be covered. We'll start off with an introduction. Then we'll have the Getting Started section. Within the Getting Started, we're going to get the software all set up. So for the on-ground version or the desktop version, we are going to show one way to purchase the software from the Intuit website. If we haven't done so, if we'd like to look through that process, we'll see how to install the software onto the computer. We will see how to back up and restore the data file, and we'll actually be able to walk through forward with that data file that we restore as we go through some of the navigation mode here. With the online version, we'll show through how to purchase the online, the different options for the purchasing of the online, and setting up the software so that then we can move forward from that point. Once the software is all installed and once we have everything set up, then we're going to go through the navigation. And we'll compare and contrast the two navigations. They're drastically different in look and feel. Of course, they're both accounting software, so a lot of the functionality will be much the same, but the look and feel between the desktop version and the online version is much different. And so we'll take a look at how to navigate around and where the main things that we will be using will be located. Then we're going to look at the double entry accounting system. This will be a bit of a theory section. We're going to throw in just a little bit of theory because that theory really helps us, one, to set up the accounting process, and two, to put in the data input and know what the data input is doing, and then three, look at those financial statements and see, one, how they were constructed, and two, how to read them. So a little bit of theory to go into our QuickBooks data entry. Then we'll take a look at the balance sheet and balance sheet options, meaning we'll create the report of the balance sheet. We'll discuss general options for all reports, and then like formatting type of options, and then options that are specific to the balance sheet. We'll have a comparative balance sheet, and we'll look at vertical and horizontal analysis. Then we'll have the income statement section and the statement of equity. We'll also look at the comparison between financial statements. This will be another quick review of just accounting theory so that we know how the financial statements are related to each other, how they fit into the double entry accounting system, because that really helps for us to see the data entry. Remember, this is the end product of financial statements. So if we know what the relationship is between them, then the setting up of the process, the data input, and of course the interpretation of those financial statements will be better to do and easier to do. Then we're going to have the profit and loss statements that we will create. So we'll create the profit and loss, which is an income statement. We'll discuss that statement, and we'll look at the options that QuickBooks has for formatting the profit and loss. Not in as much detail as the balance sheet because a lot of the formatting we saw then, but we will look at the horizontal and vertical analysis and a comparison from month to month of the profit and loss reports and interpret those reports. Then we'll look at some other reports. These are going to be supporting reports to the financial statements generally. Very common reports that we're going to be looking at here, like an accounts receivable and accounts payable aging, and detailed reports that are going to tell us how old the accounts are that people owe us and who owes us money, rather than just what we owe. The accounts payable showing us how old it is, that the debts that we owe, and who we owe that money to. So these are really important reports that aren't the financial statements, they support the financial statements. And then we'll get into the new stuff here. We're going to have the new stuff here. Note everything up above this is really just getting used to the software. And if you work at a new company, then oftentimes you won't be starting a new file from scratch. What we'll be doing is actually having a data set and navigating through that. So what we have up top is just the navigation. How do you get through the data? How do you navigate through that information? When we go to this section down, we're going to start a new company file from scratch, which is often the more difficult thing. If you are starting a new company file from scratch, the first setup process is more difficult. Once someone has set up the system, the data input should be fairly easy as long as we have someone that can guide us through the system. And then, of course, we need to interpret the financial statements. So if we can understand the setup process, we can really get a good idea. We really have a good idea of how the accounting process is going, and we can help out to make the data input as easy as possible. So when we start the new company, we'll start a new company file in both QuickBooks Online and Desktop. We'll set up the chart of accounts, we'll set up opening balances, and we'll make those little tweaks we're going to need at the end of the time period in order to make those opening balances correct. Then we're going to set up, we'll have one more accounting concepts here. We're going to talk about some accrual concepts, cash versus accrual concepts, and the revenue recognition principle and the matching principle. These are the core accounting principles that we need to have some understanding of when we do the data entry process, because it'll tell us why QuickBooks is making us do what QuickBooks makes us do, and how the financial statements are being generated from the data input that we are putting into the system. Then we're going to do what was normally done on a day-to-day process. If we just go and start working in an accounting department, we will be entering data typically and being taught how to enter the data. The system most of the time will already be set up, and we will now be entering the data And that's what we're going to do here, but we'll talk more about then just about the data input. We'll have the first month of data, and we'll be saying this is going to be the data input, and we'll see how that data input has been set up, how it's been put in place to make the data input as easy as possible, and how that data input is going to affect the financial statements. So we'll do things like entering bills, entering checks, and everything else that typically goes on in the month in this item. This will be the first month of operations, and therefore we're going to have some things that will be related specifically to the first month more so than other months, such as possibly taking out a loan to finance the business for the first month of operations, and the owner putting money into the company. We'll also focus more on cash transactions rather than accrual transactions here. We'll then run the second month of operations, and this will be more like a normal business. If we were going into a business that was already running, then the system would already be running, meaning QuickBooks would already have memorized some of reports. When we enter some of the data, we can look at last month and see what happened last month. It will auto-populate some of the information. So typically the data input by the second month is a lot easier. But our job, of course, is to do the data input and think about how the system is being put together, because the more we know about how it was put together, the more we have some understanding of what is happening, the more we will understand how the financial statements are being generated from the data input that we put in. We're gonna look at some transactions that are more on an accrual basis here on the second month of operations, and some transactions that are more unique, that don't occur as often, such as purchasing equipment and financing that equipment, paying off loan accounts according to an amortization table, for a couple examples. Those are kind of transactions that don't happen on a day-to-day process, such as having invoices and writing checks. And therefore, QuickBooks doesn't have it as set of a system to do those transactions. And we'll talk about how to record those types of transactions. We'll then talk about the bank reconciliation, one of the hugest internal controls for both small and large businesses. We really want to have a good understanding of the bank reconciliation process for any type of business that we have, and we'll go through how to do the bank reconciliation and then how to read the bank reconciliation and what QuickBooks is actually doing and why it's important. Then we'll have the adjusting entries, reversing entries. We'll also take a look at the financial statements in this section. These are going to be the transactions that we will need at the end of the time period in order to make the financial statements correct as of that time period. These are going to be things that aren't going to have a normal type of process within the QuickBooks system because they're not the normal data input processes. These are adjustments that need to make at the end of the time period. If we understand these adjustments, we can better understand the accounting principles. What is accrual accounting? What's a cash basis versus accrual basis? How to read the financial statements. So this stuff gets a little bit more into theory when we can understand how to enter this information into the accounting software. Also something that often is done by like an outside CPA firm may be helping with the end of period adjustments in order to make sure the financial statements are correct as of the end of the month and or year. Then we'll take a look at the budgeting options in both the accounting software and how to set up the budgets in both QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online.